So the NBA draft wrapped up a few hours ago, and the team with the most controversial move of the night ended up being the Knicks. And despite all the backlash New York seems to be getting online for what they did, I actually really like the move. I think it's the perfect example of an intermediate move. So the breakdown from New York's perspective is that they gave up number 11 and 4 future seconds, including next year's second, to get 3 future firsts with protections on them. And they also dumped Kemba Walker. And for completeness sake, they also rerouted some assets. They rerouted the Denver first that the Thunder got from the Pelicans for Steven Adams a couple of off seasons ago. And then they also rerouted the rights to Jalen Duren to the Pistons. The moves frees up some cap space for New York. According to Bobby Marks, they now have about $18 million in cap space heading into this summer, which they are presumed to be used on guys like Jalen Brunson. But to be honest, I think the more fascinating breakdown is with those particular 3 firsts they got in the deal. The first 2 they got from Oklahoma City, and they happen to be the 2 firsts Houston gave up for the draft rights to Alperen Sengun. And then they also got the top 4 protected Milwaukee pick in 2025 that the Blazers traded to the Pistons for Jeremy Grant after they got it for CJ McCollum. The full breakdown on those picks that New York got going forward, starting with Washington's, because that's the first one that could convey. It's top 14 protected next year, then it becomes top 12 protected. In 2025, it becomes top 10 protected, and after that, it becomes top 8 protected. If it doesn't convey, it becomes a second in 2026 and a second in 2027. And if that first-round pick sounds familiar, it's because it's the same first Washington gave up to swap Wall for Westbrook. Next is the Detroit first. This is top 18 protected starting in 2024, then it goes to top 13 protected, then top 11 protected, and finally top 9 protected in 2027. If that doesn't convey, it becomes a 2027 second-round pick. And then, of course, there's the Milwaukee first in 2025, which is currently slated in such a way that if it lands 1 through 4, it goes to the Pelicans. Otherwise, it goes to the team that holds the pick. The point I'm trying to make is that if these firsts all convey in their first year as possible, New York will have traded the 11th pick for an extra mid to late first in each of the next 3 years. And before you say that mid to late firsts aren't valuable, let me give you a list of some guys in the last 5 years who ended up being the second or third first round selection of teams. In 2017, the Lakers walked out with Kyle Kuzma at 27 and Josh Hart at 30. In 2019, the Spurs used the pick they got in the Kawhi deal, number 29 overall, on Keldon Johnson. To use an example of the Knicks themselves, they walked out with Emmanuel Quickley back in 2020. So this idea that somehow extra first-round picks mean nothing because they may be later than one prefers seems absolutely ridiculous to me. Now, if Leon Rose and the front office of New York don't use this cap space or these picks wisely, then it's absolutely fair to criticize them. But the act of acquiring picks instead of using number 11 on a guy you may or may not be happy with isn't a mistake. It's the beginning move of a chain of follow-up moves that are needed to take a bad team or a mediocre team into that next level. But based on New York's recent moves in the past year or so, I see no reason to think why they wouldn't use those picks properly. For example, how they got Cam Reddish off the Hawks. Back in 2019, the Hawks used the first-round pick they got for Dallas in the Luka Trey swap to select Reddish at 10. And then last year's draft, Charlotte traded a protected first to New York for Kai Jones. The Knicks then took that protected first and traded it to Atlanta for Reddish and some other stuff. So, if those first-round picks get used like that, It's more than fair to assume New York is capable of turning these picks into better assets or better players or what have you. And there are a variety of ways to be creative with it. For instance, take their cap space this summer. If they strike out on everybody and can't do what they did in the wake of missing out on KD and Kyrie in terms of signing a bunch of guys to short-term contracts to be flipped for more assets, they could set themselves in such a way where they offered to take on a bad contract for picks and then use one of the first they have to extract a better pick out of the team dumping the contract. There's a difference between outright losing a first round pick and trading down however many slots. On top of that, it's not as though New York is mired in a bunch of bad contracts. Sure, the Randall extension doesn't look great, and the Fournier contract looks like an overpay because of their overestimation of what he can do. But if you look at the rest of their team salary for the upcoming season so far, it consists mainly of guys on their rookie deal and a bunch of veterans who are on nothing longer than a 1+ player option. The only deal that cracks $15 million in the next 2 seasons is Derrick Rose's player option at $15.59. Nothing else is that taxing in terms of the salary books. So this idea that New York is just completely and totally screwed because they didn't use the 11th pick just doesn't match up with what I'm seeing. Now, I may be wrong, and they may fall back into their old bad habits that they fall into when they start prioritizing stars over smart team building, but I'm not so sure. And regardless of what happens, everybody will see what the Knicks will do from here on out.